In this lesson, we will build the single responsibility principle gradually. We will start with a simple intuition, state the rule clearly, and then test that rule on one Java invoice class. We will let that invoice collect extra responsibilities so the problem is visible before we change the design. Then we will separate those responsibilities and finish with one short look ahead to later design pattern lessons. Imagine a small shop where one employee handles cooking, cash handling, and bookkeeping. Those jobs belong to the same shop, but they are still very different responsibilities. A menu change affects the cooking work. A new payment process affects cash handling. A new accounting rule affects bookkeeping. Each duty can change for its own reason. When all of those unrelated duties depend on the same role, changing one area can disrupt a role that is also carrying the others. That is the fragility we want to notice. This example is only intuition. It is not the formal definition of the single responsibility principle. The useful idea to carry forward is that unrelated responsibilities create independent reasons for change. The single responsibility principle gives that intuition a precise technical rule. A class should have only one reason to change. A responsibility is a focused concern that changes for a coherent kind of requirement. The important phrase is reason to change. SRP is not saying that a class may contain only one method. Several methods can belong together when they serve the same focused responsibility. You can also think of this as supporting cohesion. Code that belongs together tends to change for the same reason. We will use one reason to change as our test when we examine invoice. Start with a small invoice class that only calculates its total. The method calculateTotal represents one focused concern: calculation. If tax rules, discounts, or total calculation rules change, this calculation logic may need to change. That gives the class one clear reason to change. At this point, the class is easy to describe. It owns invoice calculation, and the code inside it belongs to that responsibility. This focused starting point matters because we are not going to label invoice as bad just because it has code. We will watch what happens only when unrelated responsibilities are added. Suppose we add print invoice to the same class. Printing is related to an invoice, but its change pressure is different. A new invoice layout can require printing code to change, while calculation rules stay exactly the same. Then we add save to database. Persistence is another separate concern. A database change, storage rule, or persistence mechanism can require this code to change without changing calculation or printing. The invoice class now contains three responsibilities: calculation, printing, and persistence. They share a business object, but they do not share one reason to change. That distinction is the SRP violation. Tax rules can change calculation. A new layout can change printing. A database decision can change persistence. These are independent reasons for the same class to change. This also widens the risk around a small change. A print format update sits beside calculation and database code, so more unrelated code may need review and retesting even though the business change concerns only printing. Once the three reasons to change are clear, we can separate them deliberately. Move the calculation responsibility into an InvoiceCalculator whose job is to calculate invoice totals. Printing can live in an InvoicePrinter. Changes to invoice layout or formatting belong there, so they no longer force the calculation class to change. Persistence can live in an InvoiceRepository. Database or storage changes are isolated from calculation and printing instead of sharing the same class boundary. The original invoice or a small coordinating object can use these focused collaborators. The exact coordination design can vary. SRP does not require every example to produce exactly three classes. The important result is the change boundary. Calculation changes point to InvoiceCalculator, printing changes point to InvoicePrinter, and persistence changes point to InvoiceRepository. The overall invoice behavior is still available, but the responsibilities are easier to change independently. The recognition rule to remember is simple: one class, one reason to change. Ask what kinds of requirements would force this class to change, not how many methods the class contains. In the original invoice, calculation, printing, and persistence created separate reasons to change. In the refactor design, those responsibilities have focused homes, so unrelated changes no longer share the same class boundary. SRP is one design principle that builds the habit of separating responsibilities. Later in this course, patterns such as strategy and command will give us structured, reusable ways to apply that kind of separation. For this lesson, keep the core idea. Identify independent reasons to change and avoid bundling those unrelated reasons into one class. That is the single responsibility principle.